I certainly hope you enjoyed that last segment. Representative Neckwitz is just terrific. I worked with her for many years when I'm wearing my lobbying hat. She's a straight shooter. And what's really best about her is she's a true leader. She steps up to solve problems. She doesn't take that ostrich approach that you find often, not just with legislators, but in your daily lives where people try and find ways to avoid problems, not to step up and solve them. And she's definitely a problem solver. In the last two shows and in the last three long interviews, we've now examined the pension problem. And in most cases, we've looked at it at the state level. We've talked a little bit about the municipal level. In our last program, there was a brief conversation on some of the ballot measures that have taken place at the municipal level. But again, most of the conversation has been at the state level. What I think we need to understand is this is not just a state problem, but is a municipal problem. Now, when Policypedia says the size of the problem is $4 trillion, I assume that includes the municipal side, but quite frankly, I don't know. The municipal side could be another $1 trillion or so. It is a big problem. So before we leave pensions, and before we leave this topic, I wanted to take a look at some of the numbers from some municipalities, and we have some data that we got from Morningstar Municipal Credit Research, and I've seen this reported in a few places. I've seen it in Governing Magazine, The Economist recently. So this is obviously data that is being reported and people are finding, to be of interest. And before I move along here, I should remind you that the last whiteboard we did where we had the statistics on revenue percentages from states, that was courtesy of some data I found from Moody's. So I always like to give attribution when possible. In fact, I like to give attribution all the time. So for today, for this segment rather, let's take a look at the whiteboard on the municipal side of this problem. So here again, we're dealing with municipal pension liability, and here we're going to define it as by city and the unfunded liability by resident. So if you'll remember in the last whiteboard we did at the start of the show, we talked about how far certain states are as a percentage of their revenues. Here we're going to look at the chart in terms of different municipalities and how far they are behind in solving their pension problems as a function of how much they owe per resident. So for instance, if you live in Chicago, and you'll notice that Chicago is the poster child here for the most unfunded liability per resident. Chicago happens to be in Illinois, which is the state with the largest unfunded problem. So Illinois is just a mess when it comes to pensions. But if you live in the city of Chicago, per person, young, old, whatever your age, you arguably owe $18,600 into the pension system before that pension system would be made whole. Now, I don't know if $18,600 sounds like a lot of money to you. I know it is to very many people. But again, this is the per person obligation in the city of Chicago on top of whatever the per person obligation for every resident of Chicago would be for the state problem, on top of whatever number that would be for the national problem, the $17 trillion problem. And at some point, it turns into real money. So Chicago, again, is the poster child. Now, by comparison, the next highest city I could find, it may not have been New York per se, but there was a bunch that were in the 9,000 range. So Chicago's problem is really double almost what anybody else's problem is. New York is in about 10,000 per person, per resident, unfunded liability. San Francisco and LA are both around 6,400. And I thought to put this in perspective for you, I thought I would point out Detroit. So here's Detroit, and their problem is $3,700 per person. And for those of you that have been following the unfortunate financial situation in Detroit, they have filed for bankruptcy. They're trying to deal with this pension problem through bankruptcy. Yet you'll notice that the size of Detroit's problem is only about 25% or less than 25% of Chicago's problem. So these are real problems, and they need real solutions. From the shows we've done now, I think you know what the possible solution sets are. It's up to you to find out, are you living in a state or a municipality that has a pension problem? And again, decide how much you want to be involved in that problem, how you want to work towards finding solutions to that problem.